Welcome back. The White House now on day 3 of this cleanup operation following the president's 60-minute interview. Here is Karine Jean-Pierre at the White House yesterday.
The president said, and he was very clear in his 60 Minutes interview, that, COVID remains a problem and we're fighting it.
Well, he was very clear about a few things.
When Karine Jean-Pierre says the president's very clear, it's the opposite.
It's one of her crutches. It does come up a lot. It's her circle back. Let's play exactly what Biden said about the pandemic.
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. But the pandemic is over.
Says it twice. So he was very clear, I guess. The White House says COVID policy is unchanged. 2 officials telling CNN that those comments caught them off guard. So he's unscripted, John, which you know they can't stand. Another White House official saying there are no plans to lift the public health emergency. That the White House is obviously now looking still for $22 billion, folks, of COVID funding for testing, vaccine developments. Obviously, in light of the president's comments, that is all sort of up for debate now because if the pandemic is over. What about the money and power grab that would ensue? Would that be over, too?
When it comes to the pandemic, they just can't quit. Let's welcome in former California Assemblyman Mike Gatto. Also back with us, Amber Athey from the Spectator's Washington editor. Kira Davis, the deputy managing editor at Red State's, back with us as well. All right, so Mike, give us kind of your evolution on this soundbite. I'm sure you were watching 60 Minutes, tuning in for your president. This is kind of an annual thing for 60 Minutes. He said it was over, and then they said it wasn't over. And obviously there's a lot at stake here, a lot of money, a lot of kind of voting things for 2022. So is the pandemic over or not?
First of all, since I've been appearing on Newsmax, I only watch Newsmax.
Smart man.
So I didn't see the...
That's why you're so enlightened now, Mike Gatto.
We've noticed a change. We really love it.
Yeah, well, I just want to be so angry when I watch TV. But no, I didn't see the interview, but I have seen the news clips. And, I hope that this wasn't a situation like George Bush landing on the aircraft carrier and declaring victory prematurely. I hope there's no strain of COVID that comes out next year that, again, results in closures and things like that. But I do think that the state of emergencies do need to end. I believe that this way of governing, where we have governed by executive order and we've had very little scrutiny because of a quote unquote emergency, I think is not necessarily constitutional. And it's not the way that our country should be governed.
Right. And these were unscripted comments again. So you have this mixed messaging. There were a few things out of this interview that came out, which has a lot of people, shaking their heads here. Who's really in charge? Is this about power? Is this about, this funding? And with record high inflation, we're watching the Fed, in an hour from now to hit us with another hike in interest rates. Should we really be spending this type of money, Kira, on COVID funding if we are trying to move past this?
Well, no, but this is what we said all along was going to happen if we made COVID political, which we did almost from the start. You attach dollars to it, and then, of course, it can never go away. Here in the state of California, we are still in a COVID emergency. We are still in the state of emergency. The governor has not given up his state of emergency powers. We're going on year 3 of this. And, of course, he's not going to give them up easily because it comes with all kinds of federal dollars. It comes with all kinds of abilities to grant contracts to pharmaceutical companies and to medical supply companies. There's just so much power and influence that comes with keeping people locked in a state of emergency. We saw this in Los Angeles. They weren't willing to give up their mask policy until they got called out about their hypocrisy. So this was all political at this point. I agree with Mike. State of emergency needs to end. There's a reason why we call something an emergency. An emergency is short term, and they're looking to keep us in this crisis long term. The White House is in chaos. We see that from this message. This is the first time I've actually thought, you know what, not George Bush. Thanks, Mike. Joe Biden is right. It's the first time in my life I've ever thought that. He's right. The pandemic is over. It's been over for quite a while. It's nice that he's finally catching up.
There's a first time for everything, Kira, as they say. But, Amber, my concern here is there is going to be another pandemic sometime, hopefully not in our lifetimes. But the damage that's been done, not just by President Biden in the White House backtracking what he said on 60 Minutes, but Dr. Fauci being on both sides of the masks and the vaccines and all these other public health officials, no one, hardly anyone, I should say, really is going to listen to any public health official at the CDC, at the FDA, at the Institutes for Health and Allergic Infections, or whatever Dr. Fauci's organization is. There is no public confidence in these officials anymore.
Exactly. And unfortunately, if there does come another pandemic, people are not going to know who to trust anymore. They're not going to be able to believe the public health officials who are supposed to be giving them guidance about how to make decisions about their health. And what that inevitably leads to is people getting information from bad sources. And so it makes it more difficult for Americans to make the right decisions. But what's mind-blowing to me is that, it's not surprising that the Biden administration doesn't want to anger the left, so they're still pretending that the pandemic is going on, or they don't want to anger the pharmaceutical companies. But to still see Americans out on the streets or driving alone in their cars, still wearing masks at this point, is mind-blowing. It's just horrible that some people have been so brainwashed into this culture of fear that they're just unable to let go of these crutches. And I hope that Joe Biden continues to flout his administration officials and tell the truth about the fact that the pandemic is over, because there are a lot of Americans out there who need to have that confidence to move on.
Yeah, especially Mike living in California, because I used to live in LA, and I remember they were checking people at Runyon Canyon when you went out hiking if you were wearing your mask. And
they were arresting people for paddleboarding in the middle of the ocean with no one around.
Come on, Mike. That was like... Are people still driving around with the shield and the mask in California? We're in Florida, so for us, the pandemic's been over.
So,
yes, Kara?
Believe it or not, the answer is yes. You see people driving in their own cars by themselves with masks on. And I remember, like you do, the guy running down the beach in California, trying to get some exercise and getting arrested by the cops.
Yeah.
That's
we cannot go back there.
This period's going to go down in history the way that pet rocks went down in the 60s. We're all going to look back and we're going to go like, what the hell were we thinking?
Yeah.
Well, and there were esteemed studies. Johns Hopkins came out and said these lockdowns did more harm than good. Not only to what they did, obviously, in addition to, our economy, but the kids who are now behind in school and learning.
Well, that's what Amber was talking about. I think the psyche has been changed for so many Americans. They need, it's like a security blanket now, even though we know unless you wear it properly, it doesn't really protect you, but they feel better, and that's concerning. We'll have to cut it off there, guys. Great conversation as always. Never enough time for Mike, Amber, and Kira. See you guys later.